Hello and welcome to Mondays Live. I am Elle Cole from the blog cleverlychanging.com. I am a mom of twins, and my blog is about health, wellness, finance, and homeschooling and parenting. I would love for you to check out my homeschool podcast, the Cleverly Changing Podcast, where we talk about home education. And you can find that by going to my blog and going to the podcast tab. So today we have a really exciting show for you, and I hope that you will continue to tune in week after week and tell a friend about these conversations.
Hi, I'm Janus Adams. I'm an author, historian, journalist. Often Elle and I say that we are the mothers that our children raised us to be. Indeed, I too am the mother of twin daughters. And in my case, they raised me to be an activist parent who became the publisher of backpackskids.com. And come September 1st, I hope you will go there. I hope you'll go there now too, but I hope you'll go there because we will be unveiling two things that I really want you to look out for. The new book, Way to Go, Empowering Adventurous Young Minds, as well as our new anti-racist curriculum that is rooted in the work that we have been doing for years to make our children's informational diet what it should be: more equitable, more inclusive, more truthful. So that's what I'm up to. My website, janusadams.com. So.
Awesome. So today we are doing a special show. We're going to talk about your speech that you did some years ago. I believe it was in 2018.
Yes.
And the title of it is very riveting, and it is called Know When to Leave the Plantation. So before we get into that topic, there has been history made in our nation, and I want to just take a few minutes to highlight that history and just talk about how elated we are about the news. So
yes.
I'm going to give you the honor of letting
oh my
everybody
goodness
know
oh
what
my
that news is.
And I'm not even an AKA. I heard a guy say, we are not going to be able to tell these AKAs anything for a while. I think graduates of Howard too are going to be hard pressed, but they have earned it, they deserve it, and they are truly being represented in the best possible way by Kamala Harris, Senator from California, now vice presidential candidate for the vice presidency of the United States. It's so interesting because no, she is not the first vice presidential candidate as a woman. She is the first official vice president candidate as an African-American woman. And you and I, before we began, we were talking about the perspective that your daughters have, having been born in the era of Obama. Do they know what all of this is about?
They definitely know that it exists. My girls are 11 years old, and they saw my excitement, my face lit up, and every time, I don't usually turn on the TV, but I had the TV on and we were, watching the announcements. And then the next day, they did their official kickoff.
Yes.
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris did their official announcement in an empty school. And I just had to watch it, which is unusual for me because I don't like watching the news. And so they were like, Mom, it's not really that big of a deal, because my girls, when they were young, when they were babies, I remember voting for President Obama, and then he was elected, of course, and he served 8 years. So the majority of their lives was under President Obama. And so
Yeah.
their perspective is like, Mom, this, you're thinking about race and, just kind of lighten up. It's not really that big of a deal. And so we definitely have to have some follow-up conversations about why this is a big deal. And I mentioned it briefly to them. And, it just really helps cement the fact that people who are working hard, you can achieve your dreams. And I know that Kamala ran for president, and she was one of the first, if not the first, to officially announce that she was ending her campaign. And she did so with such grace, and she paid her staff, several months. And I just felt that that was so gracious. And so when the announcement came, I wasn't particularly surprised because of how gracefully she left the campaign when she ended her presidential run. But I was pleased with Joe Biden's choice. And I think it was a positive choice. Not only is she qualified to be the vice president, she is qualified to be president.
Yes. And I think, though, knowing you, I'm sure you'll have a conversation with your daughters, because in a way, it's wonderful. I mean, it's great that they have that perspective, but they also need the context of why we feel that way, and why just a couple of weeks ago, even they were looking at Black Lives Matters demonstrations.
Right.
And why all of this, why and how all of this fits together, because it is important. And also, not just important, I think, for our children to have the information, but because it's part of the process of our children not being blindsided when certain things come their way. They don't have to be jaded by the steady stream of atrocious behavior that the United States is capable of, but they don't have to be blindsided by acting as though it's one or the other. It's all gorgeous and great. And, we had Obama as president, and now we may even have Kamala Harris as vice president, which means that she will absolutely be in line to be president and may even become president, during her term. But that is a part of our truth, but it is also our job to give our kids some protection and some buffer for the other parts of the truth as to why it is so very important to us all. It is.
Right. And they definitely recognize that there are many things at stake. So even yesterday, they said, Mom, why do I see so much information out about the post office? And so they were like, why is this even an issue? And they were upset. They were disturbed. They don't look at the news very often, but when you're online at any time, the headlines often pop up. And the headline that has been in the news recently is that the post office isn't getting the funding that it needs to continue to run. And there's a shift that's happening, and voter suppression by the way of the post office and mail-in ballots is going on. And so they had a lot of questions surrounding how that is even possible and how it's being allowed. And so that was just one of the concerns that they shared with me. And so that tells me that they do understand in some ways what is going on and why her run is so important. So I wouldn't say that they're completely oblivious to it, because
I never thought that.
Yeah.
I was saying, knowing you're going to share that with them anyway. So I know that. That wasn't the implication, but I said it because I think so often as parents, generally, and particularly as Black parents, we go through these periods where, because things are so difficult, we want to and need to shield our children. And so there are a lot of people who are saying they're not going to have this certain parts of the conversation. Why tarnish their youth, their childhood? But there is a reason not to tarnish it, but to put it in context so that they can appreciate as much of it as possible and not be jaded. Also, we have families who, I think one of the things that grieves me, which plays into this know when to leave the plantation conversation that we're about to have as well, is the number of times I meet young people who talk about what they're doing, they're studying and they're doing this because they have to show the world that Black people can. And I'm saying, no, really, you don't. Who would you be showing? You would be you're trying to show the very people who are completely committed to disrespecting you, completely committed to disregarding you. It's not that they don't know. And even more importantly, it's not that we haven't done it. Do not see the world through the eyes of those who are nefarious and sometimes downright evil. And I will use that word because too much of the history of the United States regarding Indigenous people, regarding Black people, is downright evil, and I'm tired of playing games on those terms to make certain people feel better about what took place. There is no justification for this behavior. There are explanations like greed, and other kinds of things, but there's no justification for it. So in order to to shield our children, we often do that. But then too, I remind people, our same children that we are shielding will go into school and read the Diary of Anne Frank. And we don't feel the need to shield the same 11-year-old, 10-year-old from the horrors of the Holocaust. Much of that being because it happened abroad. It did not happen here. And so we can otherize that too and say, well, that was them, it's not us. Germany was very open about saying that it took its inspiration for the final solution from the United States and its treatment of Indigenous people and Black people. So all of that is wrapped up in there together. But we begin with celebrating Kamala Harris because the number one thing is that we cannot let people take away our joy and our right.
Absolutely.
To be human and to honor ourselves and the fact that we are alive. So period. For me, it's your turn. I'm not going to go on with that any longer.
So I want to get into the conversation. This is so exciting, and I think with the news of Kamala Harris, and I think it gives us a lot of hope, and that is a great segue into your speech, Know When to Leave the Plantation. And I was able to listen to it, and it was moving. It was moving in many ways. I think it causes a person to reflect on their own personal experiences and identify how those experiences may shape you, but they don't necessarily define you or define what you do in the future. And so I think that for me, it was just a story that shows that you can overcome anything and it's great to recognize your worth and move on in a positive way. And so I would love for you to talk about your speech and the impact that your experiences have had on you.
Well, I actually have the magazine here and I'm going to hold it up. I hope I can get it into the camera. This is the cover of the magazine, DB8 magazine, which is a regional magazine in the Hudson River Valley and the historic Hudson River Valley, the tourist area and straight up the tourist area of New York State. And they actually did this feature and had asked to interview me. And as we got into the interview, the writer photographer Michael Mundy, who did the story, he decided that he wanted to hone in on that speech. In 2017, I was asked to do the Distinguished Speaker Lecture for SUNY New Paltz, which was not only a high honor, and to put it into context, the person who did it the year before was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So it is a range of people, a range of issues. I've since been, and it was Dr. Neahet Graymorning, who is an Indigenous American scholar and who was doing anthropological work. It's a range of people on subjects. But I didn't know I was being vetted when I was asked to meet with a representative from SUNY New Paltz. I'm an alum, and so I thought it was about some alumni affairs thing. And as I'm on my way up to the meeting, I am coming through Ellenville, New York, and I see a traffic detour. And the way things are going, because there's also construction, I see it out of the corner of my eye, but what I pick up is what we know happens all too frequently with police stops of young Black men. And this one was particularly egregious because it was what could only be called a sexual violation. Middle daylight, supposedly pulled over for some traffic infraction, which is always a question because sometimes that's just the pretense for bothering somebody. And I mean that for those people who don't know or who don't want to know. I know that when with my son and daughters growing up in Connecticut, we had to go through numerous calls where if the kid drove a car that was a really good car, they were stopped by the police because it was, why are you driving such an expensive car? Where did you steal that car? If the kid was driving a kind of a jalopy, to use a nice word, but a car in need of work, then they would stop for that reason, saying, who are you? You don't belong here. There was always a reason to stop and harass a young Black person. And so I'm aware of that. And I have sometimes even pulled off behind the police and said, especially once my hair turned gray, and I would do something like saying, officer, can I be helpful? We know that these things these days, we all see the headlines and etc. But this time I couldn't, and it really disturbed me because I knew what I had seen. And so when I got to the appointment, I was very late because of what had happened and my trying to see if there was any way I could get back to protect this young man in any way I could, because I would have wanted somebody to do that for my husband's son, brother. And I was totally distraught. And at that point I was told, well, it was really about the speech. You know, I wasn't given an invitation, but they were feeling me out to see if I would like to do a speech. And so it went on. And then within about 2 weeks after that, I got a specific invitation to be that year's distinguished speaker. And this title had been rattling around in my mind for a while, know when to leave the plantation. And at that moment, I decided that was the speech I was going to give. Because of what I had seen in the area, Ellenville was just the next town down from New Paltz in a way, you know, 10 minutes away. And I knew from my own experience when I had gone to school there, the way I had been mistreated by police in a horrific incident. I knew that in that same area, migrant workers, because it's a northern farm community, migrant workers upon whose labor the area was wholly dependent, were derided as, quote, apple pickers. That was the name to humiliate them and to subjugate them to abuse when their labor was needed. And unfortunately, they could not get better jobs than that. And so I decided to do that speech. Know When to Leave the Plantation is a speech for America about this country still being polluted by the lack of values that created that type of society, the pretension, the greed, the lack of moral fiber that made that era of enslavement possible, and that we still have not gotten away from. The patty rollers or patrollers of then are the police who prey on young people now. We have not gotten away. The medical treatment that we are still questioning now goes back to the plantation days of considering Black lives expendable then. And it goes on and on. The refusal to allow Blacks to educate themselves then is not only part of our inequitable educational system now, but our unconscionable curriculum that still puts forth ideas rooted in kind of covering up what slavery was. And so that was the root of that speech. I will tell you that the title actually came from my granduncle, who he was born in St. Kitts in the West Indies, and he was an organizer on a plantation then. It was not, of course, this era of slavery. It was the era of neo-slavery that carried over into colonial rule throughout the world at the same time that we were going through the neo-slavery of segregation and Jim Crow segregation. So it was all of a piece. And one night someone passed word that the owners had gotten together and with their forces that he was going to be dragged off and killed that particular night. And he would have to, and he decided he had to leave that night. He literally had to flee for his life. He gets on a boat, sails to the United States. And what I love about the story, even though I'm quoting, it was his phrase, know when to leave the plantation, but what he told me also about that trip to the United States is that when he sails into harbor, he is writing a letter to my grandaunt, who is his fiance, to tell her what happened and what's been happening on the trip. And he talks about his hopes, his aspirations for what he will find here in the United States. And he says he knows that he will make it because she loves him so. And I think that those two things always have to be held together in our definitions of our lives, who we are, what our aspirations are, what our options and our possibilities are. And as you say, what we may have been tinged by, but what we choose for our lives to be. We're not all fortunate enough, unfortunately, to be able to carry forward those aspirations, those dreams for ourselves, but those of us who are, we have an obligation to do so. And my last thing is true to that plantation metaphor. When people escape the plantation on the Underground Railroad, one of its number one tenets is that you circled back in some way or another to liberate someone else left behind. And he
Yes.
did do that too. So that's the background to the speech, and that is what I hope that each time with my work and my words I am doing. I am circling back.
So we will definitely link to the speech so that people can listen to it if they would like in its entirety, because I definitely was touched by it. It's a lot to unpack, and it's very powerful. And I mean, you already are someone that I admire, but the strength to be able to endure what you endured, it's phenomenal. And I think it's definitely a story of triumph. And I think so many of us have faced adversity in our lives that could have shaped us in a way that we weren't able to leave. And I think that experience showed how much power and strength you had as a young person, because you were very young. And so I think so many young people need to hear your story, because sometimes it's easy to get caught up and think that the negativity are some of the things that you have faced, nobody else has gone through them. But the likelihood that you're not alone is very great. And so your story is a story that so many women can relate to. And I think it takes a lot of courage to share and to be honest. And I think it was just heartfelt. So I look in my past and I can identify moments that were similar. And I think that for me, it said, keep going, keep moving, keep fulfilling your goals. And one day, maybe you will have a triumph story where you can return and be asked to return in a different capacity, and you can shed light on situations and speak out in a capacity of authority. And I just thought that it was powerful. So we will definitely link to that. And thank you. Thank you for your transparency and for sharing your story.
Thank you so much. Thank you for asking and for having us have this conversation this morning.
All right, everybody, stay tuned and continue to share our episodes. You can find them on our fan pages. Let other people know about these conversations. These are intergenerational conversations that are sharing about current events and life-changing moments. And so we would love for other people to be able to share topics that they would like us to talk about. And we're looking for your engagement. So we thank you. And until next week, bye now.
Goodbye now.